Pues sí, uno de los cómics más interesantes que he leído este año es uno que compré por accidente, por decirlo así. Estaba en un paquete de Comixology a un excelente precio y me tomó un tiempo para llegar a leerlo. Es una historia que cuenta cómo un hombre con el superpoder de robar habilidades con el contacto cutáneo. Esto lo lleva a una búsqueda del origen de sus poderes y de cómo su familia y allegados se involucran en esta búsqueda. Una mezcla de crimen, espionaje, superpoderes y acción. Con esto dicho, Dynamite Comics presenta Uncanny, escrito por Andy Diego y el invitado de esta noche, Aaron Campbell, quien ha sido tan amable de aceptar nuestra invitación. How are you, Mr. Campbell?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Ok, desde ahora esta entrevista será en inglés en su totalidad para acomodar a nuestro invitado. And before starting officially, let me get the basics out of the way. You were born in May 13, and you
Yep.
were formed as an artist in School of Visual Arts in New York and in Maryland Institute College of Art. You
Yes.
have been an artist for DC Comics in works such as the Harley Quinn St. Valentine Special, and currently working for Dynamite Comics, perpetuating classics such as The Shadow, The Green Hornet, and brand new stories like the aforementioned Uncanny. Now, tell us about your beginnings in this industry. When was the moment that made you say, I'm gonna draw comic books?
I wanted to get into comics when I was a kid, first or second grade. It was from that point on that all I cared about was drawing comic books. And so all through elementary school, middle school, high school, and even into college, that was all I wanted to do. And then when I got into college, however, I didn't really have I didn't have professors at all who understood the comics industry. I started college in '96. The internet was just, at its birth. The comic book industry was still this enigma to me. And I had never been to a convention, like other than San Diego, which I didn't even know existed at that time. The entire industry of comics was a complete enigma to me. The most I was able to learn about the workings of the comic book industry was from those, that video series that came out in the late '90s from Stan Lee. It was called How to Make Comics, and it had like Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Lee. Like there was this whole series, and so you could buy those VHS tapes, and they basically I think those were filmed at San Diego Comic-Con one year, and so they were just these little half-hour kind of interviews with those guys, and that was the first time I had ever seen a creator, heard a creator talk, outside of Wizard magazine. And basically it was that really gave me the only information I had on the industry. So like I was saying before, when I got into college, I had no professors who knew anything about the industry, partly because of that and partly because I couldn't afford comics anymore at that time. Basically all through college, I stopped collecting. I wasn't able to keep drawing, comics as a passion, so I ended up focusing on fantasy illustration as my career path. That's what I focused on in undergrad at that Maryland Institute. Then when I went on to grad school at the School of Visual Arts, I continued to focus on fantasy illustration. I studied with a fantasy illustrator named Donato Giancola. He kind of really helped me move into fantasy book cover illustration. And I was just painting at that point. So when I graduated from grad school, I started doing book covers for like HarperCollins and game companies like Atlas Games and Steve Jackson Games. I did that for like a couple years, and it was really difficult because my particular style of painting is very classical. It's very reminiscent of like the Northern Renaissance, the Flemish painters. I also was never really a big fan of painting goblins and monsters and dragons and things like that. So I never really was able to make a go of that career path. I kind of struggled at that for, like I said, for a couple of years. It's really roundabout. Okay, so let me back up just a little bit.
Sure.
So when I was in grad school, in my second year, we had to do a thesis. and we all had to pick a thesis, and whatever that thesis, subject was, that determined our body of work that we produced for that year. So I was wanting to do a body of work of fantasy illustrations, but I wasn't exactly sure what subject matter I should use for that. So I ended up creating a role-playing game, like Dungeons and Dragons, with a friend of mine from undergrad, and using that as the subject matter for my paintings. And so that whole year, me and my friend worked on the actual role-playing game, and then I produced paintings to go along with it. We started to get really into this role-playing game. And after grad school, I moved back down to Baltimore. Me and him became roommates, and we continued to work on that role-playing game for the next couple of years while I lived in Baltimore. Then I left. I moved to New Mexico after that, and I've been here in New Mexico ever since. My friend, he continued to work on that role-playing game after I had moved away, and he started to do test games with a group of his friends, and he created a character for the game, which was called the Black Knight. And again, the role-playing game was like dark fantasy. Mm-hmm. And he created this character called the Black Knight, and he really was getting into his test games that he was running with his friends and really fleshing out this character. And he started to see some potential in that character as, something he could use for fodder for comic book series. The other thing to know about my friend was that he, at the time, was working for Diamond Comics distributor. One of the companies that he worked with at Diamond was Archaea Studio Press, which at the time was run by Mark Smiley. Archaea eventually became a part of Boom. Boom ended up buying them out. And they're best known, Archaea is best known for the comic book Mouse Guard. And the comic book that started Archaea was Artesia by Mark Smiley. So at any rate, he was good friends with Mark Smiley. He pitched this idea of this character that he had created for our role-playing game as a comic. And Mark was really into it because Mark is into dark fantasy. So Rob came to me and said, hey, Mark is really interested in the Black Knight as a comic, and I've got a script I think that I can present, but he wants to see some artwork. And he said, I was wondering if you would do the artwork.
But hold on, is the Black Knight from Dungeons and Dragons actually, or from the game that you created?
That I created, yeah. We created. It's a completely unaffiliated.
Oh, so you're making a spin-off from that game?
Yeah, we were making a spin-off from a game we created that doesn't exist. Yeah, it's this really kind of crazy, kind of roundabout path that we took to get to where we were. So we created this character. Mark Smiley at Archaea was interested in it. My friend, he came to me and said, would you draw it? And I, at this point, I was focusing, like I said, on fantasy illustration. I thought about it, and I kind of said to myself, I might as well. This is a chance to do a comic book, especially if Mark is interested, to do a comic book and to fulfill that childhood dream that I always had of drawing comics. And I thought at the time that I would do that mini series basically, and then that would be it. It would be like one and done, and I could go back to fantasy illustration, and that'd be the end of that. Fast forward 2 years, because that's how long it took me to draw the first issue of that book. And finally, after 2 years, I finished.
How many pages?
It was 22 pages. So it took me 2 years to draw the first issue of this comic. Granted, I was working full-time, because I was also teaching in a small art college here in Albuquerque at the time. So I was working full-time. I was also doing illustration at painting book covers and stuff. I could only really work on it when I had spare time. So, but like I said, again, I finished that and in 2 years, and then once it was done, went to San Diego Comic-Con, partly to hang out at the Archaea Studio Press table and promote the book as an upcoming release for them, and then also to basically kind of introduce myself and show my work around. Once again, let me back up slightly, because I have to introduce another player into this story, who is was another good friend of mine from undergrad named Phil Sablick, and that name probably is recognizable because he's like the marketing manager, I believe, for Boom Studios now. Me and him were both in the same illustration department together. We both graduated the same year. We were great friends all through college. We played D&D, like every week together. We hung out all the time. And so when Phil graduated, he also went to work for Diamond Comic Distributors in Baltimore. And he worked for Diamond for quite a few years. And then he moved out of Diamond and started working for Top Cow. And then from Top Cow, he moved to Boom. So at any rate, at this time, this was 2009 when I was at San Diego. And Phil was working for Top Cow at the time. And so I hadn't seen Phil since I had moved to Albuquerque, and he hadn't seen any of the new work I was doing. So I found him at the show and showed him the Black Knight work. He was like, "Oh, wow, man, this stuff is awesome." He was like, "I need to introduce you to some people." He ended up introducing me to Nick Barucci, who is the president of Dynamite, and at the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund party one night. And basically, he was like, "Well, find me during the show, and show me your work." And so this was all very fateful because Dynamite they didn't have a booth at San Diego, and I don't think they've ever had a booth at San Diego. So literally, when Nick said to find him at the show, he meant just find me wandering around amongst the crowd of 100,000 people. So I figured I'm never going to see this guy again. Mm-hmm. And so I was actually walking around the floor, and I just so happened to bump into him the next day at the show. I mean, it was a complete accident. And I had my portfolio in hand. And so right there in the middle of the showroom floor, I handed it over. He flipped through it super fast. He was like, "Yeah, this is great stuff. Contact me after the show. We'll set something up, make it exclusive, do a big deal." And I was like, "What?" And then he wandered off. And I was like, I looked at my wife and I'm like, what just happened there? I mean, did I just get work? And so I didn't see him again the rest of the show. And I got home and I immediately emailed him, and we talked, for a little bit initially, and we kind of went back and forth for a few months. And I kind of thought that it wasn't going to go anywhere. And like I said, after 3 or 4 months after the show, I think it was it was either December or January, he emailed me kind of out of the blue and was like, "I got this Sherlock Holmes book, are you interested?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And so that was my first book, was Sherlock Holmes, and it was written by Leah Moore and John Reppion. To back up to the Black Knight book, basically that got put on got pushed to the side, and I've never actually gotten back to it. So that thing that took me 2 years to draw, it's lingered no man's land for the past 7 years. I mean, we even had a contract with Archaea at the time for publishing, but it was just, as soon as I started getting actual work, I just didn't have time. I've never been able to find time to get back to it. So, but that's the big, long, roundabout story of how I got into comics, and that's the thing. I've been in comics now ever since. So
working full time, right?
What's that?
Working full time as a comic book illustrator.
Yeah, working
right?
full time. Yeah, because once I got Sherlock Holmes, like I said at the time, I was also teaching at this little podunk art school here in Albuquerque, and I hated it, and I was even the chair of fine arts there, and it was just a really awful place. As soon as I got that work, and I mean, I really had to do a bit of soul searching, because it was to do that, to take that on full time was a significant pay cut from what I was making as, arts professor and chair of a department. But it was it was what I wanted to do. It was what was important to me. So, I talked to my wife and we agreed that we could figure out how to make it work. And, what I was making early on at Dynamite was, it was enough for us to manage, but, I was also, certain that I had to really push myself to keep improving so that I could ask for more as I move forward at my career at Dynamite. I mean, and Dynamite has been the main company that I've worked for throughout my entire career so far as a comic book artist. So I owe a lot to them.
Now that you mentioned Dynamite, in their collected editions, they always leave a script of the first or even sometimes second issue. And I've been comparing the volume 1 of The Shadow and the Green Hornet that you illustrated, and I see that both Matt Wagner and Garth Ennis, they have different styles of scripting a comic book. Now, how is it a specific way to communicate with writers to express in their scripts, or is there back and forth that in the script says something, but you have something else in mind that could be better? How does that goes, and how different it is from writer to writer?
Okay. So, in terms of, what kind of input I might have?
Correct. Yeah, because at the end of the day, you are the ones that is actually illustrating it, you're giving the comic book its namesake.
Yeah. So, with Matt Wagner, Matt Wagner was a real joy to work with because he's an artist. I mean, he's first and foremost an artist, so he understands the artist's perspective when he's writing his scripts. He keeps his scripts super minimalist. I mean, he only puts in the absolute bare minimum that needs to be in the script, and he really trusts well, and this is the other thing too, is, Matt Wagner, just because of who Matt Wagner is, he has ultimate say over who he works with. So Dynamite wanted to put me on that book, but at the end of the day, it was Matt Wagner who gave me the thumbs up. So that was a huge honor. So because of the fact that Matt Wagner knows, he chooses who he works with that way, he has a lot of confidence in the people that he works with. So he gives the people that he works with, at least this is how I experienced it. He gave me a lot of freedom to add my own input, especially when it came down to, if I had a different idea for how a sequence might, play out, I could definitely give him my feedback, and I could change things up. I mean, and here's the thing, at the end of the day, I didn't really change anything, because especially at that point, I was definitely totally wet behind the ears. When I started Green Hornet, I only had, I can't remember if Sherlock was 5 or 6 issues, but at any rate, I'd only done 5 or 6 issues of comics. I had absolutely no pride, I had no ego at all built up at this point. So I was very much timid about interjecting my own ideas, and the only time that I did, it was very rare, but the only time I did, if I really thought I had a good idea for how to alter things. So for the most part, I did what I drew what Matt had written in his scripts, because I was like, he's Matt Wagner. He's the he's the authority. I can't imagine that I would have a better idea than him. So, but again, like I said, he always was very gracious, and he always, took my input in, he always gave great amount of consideration to it. Now, when I moved to working with Garth Ennis, that's a different story. There was one time when I had an idea basically I was like, there was one page where I was like, I think that this one panel could be split up into multiple panels.
Yeah.
So when I was doing my layouts, I did that. I took this one panel that I thought should be in multiple panels, and I split those up, and I sent it off to him, and I just got this email back saying, "Yeah, don't change my script." And
God.
and so I was like, okay, that's fine. And once again, I was like, you're Garth Ennis, so who am I to, who the hell am I to, say anything? And so that was it. I mean, from then on, I drew exactly what Garth had written. But again, even then, I would still consider myself to be, a greenhorn at that point. So, but now, then I moved on to working with Andy Diggle. And with Andy Diggle, he's a lot closer to my age. I mean, granted, I think he might be about 10 years, he might be close to 10 years older than me, but we're still a lot closer in age. We're still a lot closer in terms of, our generational gap. It was, I could definitely tell, working with Matt Wagner or Garth Ennis that I was working with, an individual who is a veteran of the industry. And with Andy, Andy Diggle, his ego was very much closer to my ego. I mean, granted, he's done some really amazing stuff at Vertigo. He was just coming off of his run with Superman. So, but Andy, super down to earth guy. I had some major input into that book. Anytime I had an idea, I would shoot it off to him. And actually, issue 7 of Uncanny was largely based on an idea that I had about the character, and which was that. So with Uncanny, I guess I should give just a little bit of a background. Uncanny is about this dude named Weaver, who's he's a globe-trotting kind of vagabond kind of guy who skirts by the skin of his teeth, and he just so happens to have this superpower, and he thinks he's the only one like him in the world. He thinks that there's he has this weird ability to take other people's ability, kind of like Rogue, but he can only take it for just a few minutes, and but during those few minutes, he knows everything that the other person knows. He has all of their best skills, best traits, and so he can use those little those things against the other person. Somebody's really good with a gun, he can take their power to use guns. There's this one scene in the book where he's trying to escape airport security, so he grabs one of the airport security guards, and he learns all of the airport protocols so he can use them so he can get away. So at any rate, I had this idea, basically, in the script, Weaver had spent some time in a psychiatric, youth ward when he was a kid, and so there was these scenes where there was supposed to be all of this documentation from his time in the psych ward, and so I had this idea. I was like, wouldn't it be really cool, if during those years that he was in the psych ward, his power actually worked completely against him. Because of his power, while he was in the psych ward, it just kept getting worse and worse, and they kept adding more and more psychoses to his file. The idea was that every time he would interact with another patient, touch them, he would take, because of his ability to absorb other people's traits, he would absorb temporarily the psychoses and the mental illnesses of the other patients. So I sent Andy this entire laundry list of all of these different mental illnesses that he had been diagnosed with throughout his time as an inmate in one of these psychiatric hospitals. And Andy was like, "That's awesome! It's so cool!" And so basically in issue 7, where we do a flashback and we see Weaver's childhood, and we see some of the moments from when he was in the psych ward, there is specifically a moment where he ends up taking on other people's mental illnesses. And I felt really good about that. I was I've always kind of aspired to write, but I've never really had the opportunity. And so like having little moments like that where I can just kind of influence a character's story is really a kind of a high watermark.
Now that you mention Uncanny in so much detail, that was like I told you before, is the comic book that actually made me curious to see who wrote it because of how well the sequences were done and how expressive the art was. Is it possible? And you can say no. You can refuse to answer this question. Are we gonna have a season 3 of Uncanny? Is it in the plan?
Oh, I mean, yeah, no, we won't. I mean, because the book was canceled because just numbers weren't high enough on it. So that's no secret. But people have asked me that before, and I've always said like, yeah, no, unfortunately, there's not going to be any more seasons of Uncanny, as far as I know. I mean, Dynamite has been known to like bring things back, but I think just based on the numbers, that won't happen. And to tell you the truth, at the end of the run, I'm not even sure what the numbers on the book were. I mean, I know that the first issue, that issue number 1 was like sold, I think maybe over 20,000, maybe close to 30. But I know that it dropped off pretty significantly over the series. Yeah, it's just one of those things. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm no expert, but I could see that each panel in Uncanny was very detailed. How much of your time in the day you had to work on every single issue, because it came monthly, right?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, but in the second season, there were a lot of delays on the book, and that was all because of me. So, and that was because I was having some pretty horrible things happening in my personal life. My father was passing away from brain cancer. So while I was working on season 2, so basically it was taking me at least 2 to 3 months to do an issue there in season 3. In terms of how much time, it was taking me, like if I could condense, like all of the hours that I'd actually work, like I always tell people on a good day, I can do a full page, and that's a really good day. Now, and this was then. Things have changed now. We can get into that in a little bit, but yeah, during that, on a really good day, I could do a page. But that was a really good day, and that was a pretty rare day, especially and that was 2014. So yeah, basically throughout 2014, I may have done 6 issues of comics during that year, maybe a little bit more. Again, my process has changed fairly significantly since then. But my process, working all the way up through Uncanny is, I shoot lots of photo reference because I use photo reference for just about everything, especially for all my figures. So I shoot photo reference. I even use, I use 3D programs, 3D modeling programs to create character faces, to create character heads, so I can create distinctive characters. I use Google SketchUp for environments. Then I'll just use regular photo reference, like stuff that I've taken or whatever. And then basically I take all of that material and I basically create a collaged page. I put all of my my photo reference, all my model reference, all my Google SketchUp reference, I put all of that onto page, and I do all of this in Photoshop, okay? And once I would get my pages all composited exactly the way that I want them, I would print that out, blue line, in non-repro blue, onto my page. I'd print that out, and then I would basically ink directly over that. Now that's how I was working. I started working specifically that way towards the end of the Shadow, I think, but definitely all the way through Uncanny. And that was more, I'm working directly over my reference because, I've been struggling now for a couple of years trying to keep up pace because of how much work it was. And so, prior to that, when I was, Sherlock was different, but on Green Hornet and Shadow, what I would do is I would actually do a pencil stage. So I would do all of that where I would composite these pages with photo reference, and then from that photo reference I would then do a pencil drawing, and then I would go from the pencil to the inks. And so eventually I was just like, this is too much work. And so I just cut out the pencil stage altogether, because it was like, why? Why am I killing myself for this like kind of weird notion of artistic integrity to like, have this like pure pencil stage, when I had just, one of the things that kind of influenced me to change was I had watched this documentary on Drew Struzan, the poster artist who did, all the covers, all the posters.
Oh yeah.
The posters for Star Wars and
that's the one I was gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah, because Drew Struzan was like, he made no qualms about it. He was like, yeah, I have an autograph projector, and I take my photo reference, I put it into the autograph, and then I trace straight over that. And then once I have that basic tracing down, then I go in and I start building up my, finished piece. And so for years I had, even when I was in grad school and I was working with Donato Giancola, I was bringing my work into his studio, and I remember one day he told me, he was like, it's no crime to trace. He's like, I do it, and everybody does it. And he started pulling down all these art history books. He was like, Caravaggio traced, Hans Holbein traced, like all of the Northern Renaissance painters traced. They all used camera obscura, like all of them. Vermeer especially. Vermeer had a camera obscura room. That's why all of his paintings take place in that same room, because that's where his camera obscura was set up. So, and then I saw the and then even further back in undergrad, we had a guest speaker come and talk, an illustrator by the name of Guy Biot. He's this French illustrator living in New York, and he does this like, highly conceptual illustration, but very much, you could tell it's very much photo referenced. And we're all sitting in the audience listening to him, and it came to the question and answer phase, and somebody asked him, like, what's your process? And so he said, well, basically, what I do is I take my photo reference, and then I go into my studio and I put that photo reference onto a projector, and I trace it. He just said I trace it, and then once I get that basic tracing down, then I take it off and I make my changes that I want to make to the tracing, and then from the tracing, then I start building up my final illustration. And this was the first time, in this undergrad, this is the first time we'd ever heard of a professional illustrator saying that he traces.
And it was shocking, right?
Yeah, it was absolutely shocking. And we even looked around, and all of our professors were like cringing, because it had been beat into us, for years, that like tracing is evil. It's this evil thing. It represents an utter lack of ethics and morality, in art. So yeah, and so finally, like, I've been flirting with that idea for so long, and then I saw that Drew Struzan documentary where he was like, yeah, I just trace it. I was like, that's Drew Struzan. I mean, he's like he's one of the greatest illustrators of our age. And that's when I was just like, what, screw this. I'm like, I'm done, like, with the pretense. And it's like, at the end of the day, who cares anyway, because my process is my own. All that matters is the finished piece. So, and if I can get it done faster, then all the better. So yeah, so that's from there, from Sherlock, from the shadow to uncanny, I just was like, screw it. I'm just going to work straight over my reference and be done with it. I'm going to completely eliminate the pencil phase, go straight from my photo reference to my inking, because at the end of the day, too, my pencils were very kind of stale, and it wasn't until I actually got out my brushes and my ink, and I started like getting in there, did I really start to loosen up and get expressive with my marks. So, ultimately it didn't really matter, and it cut my working time almost in half. But even then, still, like, even cutting my working time in half was still a monumental amount of work. So after Uncanny, I actually took some time off from comics, and I just did some painting. And then I it was like 6 to 8 months I was on a hiatus just painting. Then after that I was like, I need to start making some money. and I need to get some comic book work again, that's when I got the Felix Leiter book with Dynamite.
James Bond, yeah.
Yeah, James Bond. And so now, basically, after that, because, like one of my comic colleague, Mitch Gerards, I've known Mitch since he was working on The Activity with Nathan Edmondson. And, off and on. I'd run into him every once in a while. We'd hang out. But I was at HeroCon a couple years ago, and Mitch was there, and we hung out quite a bit. He was coming off, basically at that point, he was, I think, wrapping up his run on Activity, and he had not yet gotten the Punisher book. We were hanging out, and we started talking about our process, and come to find out, the two of us basically worked exactly the same way at that point. Exactly the same way. And, Mitch spent a lot less time in his inking phase. He did a lot more work in his color phase, and I don't do color. So, he did a lot of work in his color, but it was basically the same process. And then he started working on Punisher. I'm not sure when he shifted, but there was a point, and it may have been when he started Punisher, because we're friends on Facebook, and I started seeing him working on the Wacom tablet, and I was like, dude, are you not doing any traditional media anymore? And he was like, nope. And I was like, oh wow. And so I just kind of thought about that for a while. Once I started working on James Bond, and I've had a Wacom, I've had a Cintiq for years. I've just never done the finished work on it. And so finally I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to try just doing it completely digitally. And so I've been doing, all the work I've been doing on Felix Leiter has been all, and I'll have to say, I had to kind of, reteach myself, and I definitely had to, abandon all of the canned Photoshop brushes that come with Photoshop, and, find good brushes. I use brushes by this, through this site called Kyle Brush.
And there's a divide that we have in our community. Some people prefer physical inking, others prefer digital inking. As for the result of your work, the finished product, which one do you think is in your view the ones that reflects how you want to present it?
Well, yeah, it's weird because there are these little moments in my traditional brushwork that I think I'll never be able to replicate on the computer. It's just not. I just don't think it's. Maybe someday, but right now, no. But the problem is in consistency, because working on the computer, I think my work is consistently better. I might not have these moments where I have this really incredible mark that I've made, or this really nice line. With the computer, if I make a bad mark, I can undo it and try again. And I can keep undoing until I get that perfect mark. So I'm always getting the mark that I want. Whereas that's something if I go back to my, traditional pages, I always feel so dissatisfied with the pages as a whole, because, I'm stuck. As soon as I make a mark, I'm stuck with it. I can only do it once, and then I'm done, and I have to move on. And there's something to be said for that, finality, that might actually force you to be more considerate about your mark making. But at the end of the day, I'm not creating gallery art. I'm creating art for the printed page. So as far as I'm concerned, the original piece that I have sitting there in my studio is not nearly as important as what ends up getting printed, because that's what this medium is about. It's about that printed book. Mm-hmm. And there's a collector's market out there for original pages, and it is a trade-off. It does suck that I don't have original Felix Leiter pages to sell at conventions now. On the other hand, I am working so much faster now. On a good day now, I can do 2 pages. On a good day, I can do 2 pages. Doing 1 page a day is easy. It's easy, and I don't even have to work nearly as long as I did before to get that 1 page done. I can wake up at 7, get to work by 8. You know, if I really stick to it all day long, I'm done with that page by the time my wife gets home at 6. And then I have the rest of the evening. Whereas before, you know, like working on Uncanny, like, you know, if I really wanted to get that page done that day, I would be up late. You know, and I would be exhausted. You know, I'd be up all day working. I'd have to, you know, my wife would get home, and we'd make dinner, and then as soon as dinner was over, I'd have to get back to work, and then I could be up till 10 or 11 o'clock, and that was a pace that was really difficult to maintain. I'm going to be turning 40 this year, so, you know, I have a friend, Andy Kuhn, who, you know, he's also a comic book artist. You know, he's much better known than I am, as far as I know. I mean, he's done a lot of work on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's been doing Mars Attack stuff. He did one of his creator-owned books was called Fire Breather. He's probably about 15 years older than me. You know, and he's always saying, like, every time we talk, and we kind of commiserate about how, you know, hard life is. He's like, "Yep, comics is a young man's game." So, you know, at this point in my life, the name of the game, figuring out the balance. So working digitally helped me create a much better balance between my work life and my personal life, between a healthy amount of exhaustion. And
having been worked on iconic characters like the Shadow, James Bond, the Green Hornet, even Sherlock Holmes, is there a bucket list of characters that you would like to touch in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I got to draw Batman in that Harley Quinn special, which was awesome. I love drawing Batman, and I would very much like to do, even if it was just a few issues, do like an actual Batman book. That's probably number 1. Number 2 would be Captain America, because and here, this is the weird thing about Captain America. Captain America isn't actually a character that, like, especially like in high school, I never collected Captain America. I was totally an X-Men kid. Like, I collected X-Men and like everything X-Men related, like X-Factor, X-Force, the New Mutants. I collected all of that stuff. But at the time, you know, this was the early 90s, so in the early 90s, you know, the Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, those were all second-tier books back in the day. I collected, you know, I would collect the Hulk every once in a while, because especially like when Dale Keown was drawing the Hulk, I collected the Hulk. And I collected Spider-Man because of Todd McFarlane. Totally a devotee of that Image crew. Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee. My favorite was Mark Silvestri. Wolverine. Wolverine was always my favorite character. I mean, like if I could only pick one character, it would have been Wolverine to collect. So all of those guys, you know, Rob Liefeld, I loved all of them. My tastes have completely changed, and though I still, like, you know, appreciate those guys, it's just not the kind of illustration I'm into anymore. I'm much more of a, like, actually my influences are actually more mid-century American, classic American illustrators. But yeah, like I was saying, Captain America wasn't actually a book that I really collected that much. But the reason why I would love to draw Captain America is because there was, especially like, I guess in the early aughts, like with Steve Epting, when Steve Epting started drawing Captain America, it, as far as I'm concerned, it was like a real shift in what art could be for comic books. And I started to see Captain America as sort of this showcase for classic comic illustration. Illustrators who were influenced not just by classic comic illustrators like Jack Kirby, but also by classic American illustration.
But now that you say classic, and before you go on, yeah, which era of the Captain America you would like to work on, like before or after freezing? Because you say classic, and I'm like, okay, he wants to illustrate the war times and things like that. But
oh yeah, like I love, you know, anything that has to do with like World War II kind of era of books.
Oh, hence the Shadow, right?
Yeah. I mean, like that would, you know, like if it was like an Elseworld story that, you know, took place, you know, it was like Captain America during World War II, that'd be awesome. But I mean, to tell you the truth, I don't care what era it would be. It's for me, it's more about following in the footsteps. Like that was one thing that I felt like I felt really honored to draw the shadow, because the footsteps in whom I was walking. I was walking. I was the first person to draw the shadow in 24 years. Like that was the first time the last time the shadow had been in comics, the 1994 Shadow movie.
Oh, okay. Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, okay, so the Alec Baldwin Shadow, and that was 1994, and in conjunction with that, Dark Horse did a couple series of shadow books.
Oh, yeah, I have them. It's
because
the Coils of the Leviathan.
Yeah,
really good books.
Yeah, so you had Gary Gianni drawing the shadow, and Gary Gianni is he's one of my all-time favorites. So Gary Gianni was literally the last person to draw the shadow, as far as I know. So, and before that, you had Kyle Baker.
Kaluta.
All the amazing
I don't know.
illustrators.
I don't remember the first name. Kaluta. He wrote the Hitler's.
Oh yeah.
Hitler's astrologer.
You had him. You had Steranko drew the shadow, and there's a litany of other like amazing comic book illustrators who drew the shadow. And that's the whole thing. It's like, if you go back through the history of the Shadow comics, like every one of them, say what you will maybe about some of the stories, but in terms of the art, it was all like greats, like artistic greats drawing the shadow. I mean, I felt at the beginning, I felt a little intimidated by that, but then I was also, it was a real honor to be able to represent the shadow after this, all of these amazing artists who drew the shadow. So for me, like going back to the Captain America thing, that's what that has to do a lot with more than anything else. Is I just, all of those illustrators, for the past like 10 or 15 years who drew the shadow were just like all people that are really respected as artists. So that's a character I would really like to draw. To tell you the truth, like in terms of superhero stuff, like I don't even really read superhero books anymore. And that's mainly because like I feel like completely overwhelmed by like I wouldn't even know where to start. Like I would have no idea like how to
you'd have to be selective then.
What's that?
You'd have to be selective, pick and choose.
I know, because it's like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, there's so much going on. Like, I would just feel completely lost. So, now granted, Hawkeye is a book that I read. Because David Aja...
by Fraction?
Yeah, Matt Fraction and David Aja. Yeah, because, I mean, that book is singular as far as I'm concerned. It's so different from anything else. Well, at least when, that book first started coming out, it was so completely different from any other superhero book out there. But other than that, like, I mean, the stuff, I have so little time to, like, read comics anymore that I'm just very selective. Like, I really don't even pick up single issues anymore. I just wait till trades come out. And I tend to stick to, short series, like 6-issue, 12-issue, series, one and done, like one-off kind of books. Yeah, so, I mean, I guess, I don't know, back to other characters. Like I said, Batman definitely, Captain America definitely. I don't know if they ever bring Wolverine back or they do any other, because I don't know what's going on with Wolverine these days. I know he's supposed to be dead. And I guess there's Old Man Logan, but, I always dreamed of drawing Wolverine when I was a kid, but I just don't know how like feasible that is anymore. I'm actually more interested in like doing my own thing nowadays. Like I'd rather like a lot of artists, I'd rather move toward creator owned if I can figure out how to do it. So
there's always Image Comics and Dark Horse.
Yeah, and I did a little bit of work for Dark Horse last year. I did a short story over 3 issues of Dark Horse Presents, which actually I did the work last year, but it just came out like over the past few months. But I am working. I can't actually like talk about it really at all, other than to say that I do have a creator-owned book in the works. When I'm done with James Bond, if we have a publisher, that's what I'll be doing, is this creator-owned book.
All right. Yeah, I'll be waiting for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the our creative team is amazing. So I'm extremely excited about that. But that's as much as I can say about that.
Sure, sure. We understand. So yeah, and as comic book fans, we always end up in cliffhangers. So it's like
Yeah.
everybody's already used to this. Now to finish up in Dominican Republic, the comic book business, as I told you, is still in diapers. But there are many young artists out there that will listen to this because we have a pretty big audience there, and they are passionate about this. What is your word of advice for them to make it big, or at least to have a full-time position in houses like Dynamite?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, okay, so there's a few things. I mean, you need to have quality of work. And so either you need to have the God-given talent or you need to like really work at it. Like you need to be able to draw really well. So that's the first thing. So and you need to be able to draw. I always tell students is like comics is unlike any other form of illustration because you literally have to be able to draw everything. Everything. Like a coffee cup, a remote control, a car, a plane, a person, a house, a road, a tree. Like you need to be able to draw everything, and you need to be able to draw it well. So so you need to do that. You need to practice, practice, practice. Draw all the time. Draw everything you can find. Use reference. Like I always say, like there's nothing wrong with using photo reference, even if you draw like in a cartoonish style that isn't about photo reference. You still need photo reference. I mean, look at all the great Disney animators. They always had like they all like. If you look at old images or even images nowadays, they don't actually do 2D illustration anymore. But you know, if you look at the old images of Disney Studios, every animator had a mirror next to their drafting table so that they could look at themselves making silly expressions on their face, so they could understand how the muscles in the face work. You know, a lot of people will say, like I always say, that if you're an illustrator in comics, basically, if you were to equate it to a movie set, you have the writer, and the writer is basically the screenwriter, and then you have the artist, and the artist really he is the cinematographer, he's the actors, he's the director, he's the CG department.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's everything. He's everything else, which means like understanding expressive action is important. Understanding acting is important in comics, especially if you want to get like good expressive faces, which is really important. And that's something I still work on, like all the time. I'm constantly being very critical about how I use faces and facial expressions.
Do you look at yourself when you're drawing?
Yeah, I look at myself. I'll go online and I'll try to find, like good images of people, screaming, yelling, laughing, crying, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, whatever I can find to like figure it out. So once again, like photo reference is a great tool. I mean, and use it how you want to use it. Use as little of it as you want or as much of it as you want. But at the same time, I also say never be a slave to your photo reference, because photo reference can get really weird. Like weird stuff can happen in photo reference, especially when you're talking about foreshortening and stuff. So you have to be prepared to deviate from that and understand how to fix it so that it ends up looking right. So there's that. And that all goes back to the just learning how to draw well. And then getting back to the whole tracing thing, when you're first learning how to draw, you shouldn't be tracing. You need to learn how to draw first before you start tracing. Because if you haven't learned how to draw before you move to that stage, then you'll never know what's wrong with your drawings. You'll never understand why your tracing looks like a tracing, because you'll never understand how to use it judiciously, if that makes any sense. So then, like getting down to the nuts and bolts, what I always tell people is, first of all, I mean, we live in the age of the internet, so like you can find out everything you possibly need to know about how a comic book is produced and how a page is drawn, whether it's a traditionally drawn page on an 11 by 17 piece of, Bristol paper, or if it's, in a computer on a Cintiq tablet or a Wacom tablet. But figure out like everything, all of the infrastructure of the page. So because so many times I've had people come to me with portfolios that are drawn on like 8.5 by 11 sketchbook paper, or and the proportions are all off, and I'm just like, this is, or even though they'll bring me pages that they've done everything there on that one page. They've penciled it, then they've inked it, and then they've gone in and they've done the coloring with color pencil. And I'm just like, I have to tell them, I was like, okay, first of all, you need to learn the proportions of a comic book page. You need to learn like your gutter spacing, and then the other thing is you got to learn that comics are it's an assembly line process. You have the people who do the penciling, the inking, the coloring, the lettering. It's all separate. So when you go to an editor with this page that's been already completely finished, and not only just finished ink-wise, but also like you've gone back in with like colored pencil over top of it, like an editor's not going to know what to do with this. He's not going to understand where your skills lie. Keep your process separate. If you're the kind of person who wants to just do pencils, then just show pencils. Work on pencils and don't go any further. Mm-hmm. If you want to now granted, nowadays there's not a lot of people who, outside of DC and Marvel, there are very few artists who who at least don't go up through the inking stage. If you want to be the kind of person who's not just a penciler or not just an inker, but like the artist, like you want to be the artist credit on the book, then, show a finished page, but don't show color. So, show that finished inked page. And then if you want to be a colorist, you gotta show something different then. But you gotta go in, do the research, figure out what those stages are and how they function. Just figure out, and that's just the nuts and bolts of things. And then finally, like in terms of a portfolio to show, I always say like, don't show like character sketches, don't show like just random one-off pages. Like none of that makes any sense to a comic book editor, because a comic book editor needs to know that not only are you a good draftsman and you're a good artist, that you have your own specific voice in your work, but also that you can tell a story. And the only way that you can show an editor that you can tell a story is over several pages. So they need to be able to see how you move from panel to panel and how you use the gutter, how you use that negative space of the gutter to move that story forward. So I always say, okay, don't ever use your own scripts unless you're trying to get a creator-owned book. If you're trying to get a creator-owned book, then definitely you need to use your own scripts. But if you just want to get work, like at Marvel or DC, you need to, like I always say, just find a pre-existing script, like an old script. Like go way back to like the 80s or the 70s, find just some old script, take 5 pages of that script that shows good action, but it also shows quiet moments, like just talking, like people talking and interacting quietly, so that you can see those you can see the editor can see how you deal with the action, how you deal with the quiet moments, and how you deal with the transition between those moments. Don't do splash pages. Everybody can do a splash page. Every page should be chock full of panels, and do at least 5 pages sequentially. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't split them up. If you have to split them up to find your moments, then you can, but I always try to say do at least 5 consecutive pages. That's all an editor needs to see. If you can hold a story, if you can tell a story over 5 pages, then you can tell a story over 22 pages, or 32, or 48, or whatever. And that's basically it. And then the other thing is just go to cons. Granted, I've been really bad about going to cons recently. It's been a long time since I've been to a convention. But in the beginning, I was going to cons a lot. That's the best kind of advice I can come up with but it's not how it worked for me. I mean, I told you, you heard how it worked for me.
Yeah,
how it worked was that I knew people. Like, I had friends who were already in the business, so like I was really fortunate in that regard, that I didn't have to go through the years that it sometimes takes for somebody to get their first book. Some people do. Some people, like you have to be ready to, like, if it's really your passion, if that's really what you want to do, you have to be ready to spend years trying to get that break. So if you don't have and then that requires grit. And that's something that I probably don't have, but
but you made it.
I always. Oh, and here's another one. Here's a real simple one that I've always heard, is that you need 2 of 3 things to make it in comics. You need to be and this can be in a combination: good, on time, nice. And as long as you're 2 of those, then you'll be able to make it in comics. So you could be on time and nice, and maybe not that good. But if you're on time and you're a nice guy, then you'll get work. If you're like a complete asshole, but you're always but you're always on time and you're really good, then you'll get work. As long as you have that combination of 2 of those 3, then you should be able to get work in the industry. So, and this is the last thing that I tell people. And I say, okay, this is what you need to do.